Hello, English language teachers worldwide. It's time for another American TESOL Institute webinar. I'm your host, Jason R. Levine, better known as Fluency MC, and I have the great honor and privilege of hosting this monthly webinar series where most of the time we focus on a topic for teacher development, which we'll be doing today. We also have a program called Featured Teachers, where we bring in somebody who's well-known and loved in the ELT world and interview them, pick their brain, find out about what they do, how they do it, because that can be very inspirational. We will be coming at you soon with another Featured Teachers. Today, we're going to be focusing on my all-time favorite area of applied linguistics and English language teaching, which is lexical semantics, so word meaning, vocabulary, but specifically on three areas that I don't talk about a lot. So I'm excited to get into it. If you know me, I'm really into collocations and sort of see synonymy, polysemy, and homonymy, love saying those words, through the lens of chunking, through collocation, like a lexical approach, beginning with the chunks and then recognizing, okay, where are the synonyms? Where are the polysemous words? We'll get into that because that term is definitely not as known as the other ones here. And the homonyms. I'm going to be doing the opposite today, which is looking at these three areas with you. And but along the way, seeing how collocations, because of course that's always there, collocations can be, should be, are the best way to help learners build their vocabularies and understand when words have similar meanings, or when words have multiple meanings, or when they sound or are spelled the same but have different meanings. We're going to get into all of that today when we talk about building learners' vocabularies through synonymy, polysemy, and homonymy. So all of this, guys, is lexical semantics, which is simply word meaning. But of course, is that simple? In some languages it is. English is not one of them. With the vast vocabulary English has, with all of the borrowings, and before that, just the origins of English as Germanic language, but then with vocabulary coming in from Latin, but also Greek, it makes it very rich, but confusing sometimes for learners and you as teachers. And the first thing we need to talk about today is raising your awareness of lexical semantics versus your students, because that's a big difference, obviously, unless you have super advanced older students where you're going to talk to them a lot about the terminology. I don't advise that, but for you yourself to understand enough so that then you can help learners build their vocabularies, whether you're explaining certain things in easy terms or not even explaining, but knowing what's behind all of this as a way to motivate them and get them on the path to remembering vocabulary and increasing their vocabularies. So lexical semantics includes other aspects than those three we're going to talk about. A big one is the word combinations, but we are going to talk about those. But then there are other hyponymy, for example, antonymy, which is antonyms. We'll talk about that, goes with synonyms, but it gets a little more complicated getting into antonyms. I wanted to make sure we had enough time today, and as I said, to talk about this subject in a teacher training way, and also talk about it in terms of what you could do with your students. Of course, those intersect, but I think you know what I mean. So let's get right into it. Synonymy, not a word we hear or see very often because we're usually talking about synonyms. I mean, sometimes we say this is synonymous with that, but what are you going to say with your students? You're going to talk about words that have similar meanings, closely related. Now, how closely related? Are they interchangeable or not? And that's what gets really interesting about synonyms. And we'll see as we talk just how important this category is, especially of lexical semantics, especially when you include antonyms in there as well. Yet it is not the only thing. And sometimes I get the feeling when I see books and teachers that when they're talking about lexical semantics, they're really focusing almost exclusively on synonyms. We have a thesaurus for synonyms, but the other two categories are really, really important too. And synonyms, just teaching which words are similar to others, doesn't mean that your students will remember the words, let alone be able to use them naturally. So let me back up a bit. I guess it should have been on the screen before, but anyway, it doesn't matter. We also have to think, okay, we don't want to just teach grammar. We want to build vocabulary. That's a given here, right? We can talk about how maybe too much time is spent on grammar than vocabulary. But even vocabulary, say, okay, I'm a teacher who really wants to build vocabulary, but there's a difference, isn't there, between, lists of words, especially with definitions. We're going to talk about how that's problematic. And students say, okay, I know this word. Well, what does it really mean to know the word? So really, really important as we go through this to consider that, right? Is it enough just to offer this list of synonyms? How are students going to really understand how to use them? And then before that, remember them. As always, we're talking about teaching, the little ones to the adults, from A1 level to C1 level. So we're in 1 hour not going to be able to hit on specifics so much, but there's some really important general pieces of advice I have based on my experience and teachers out there who have influenced me and what I've learned. So here we go. Back to our categories. Synonyms. But as I said, how close are they? And this is where it gets really interesting. And if you are not an experienced teacher, whether you're a native speaker or not, you just haven't thought about it enough. And native speakers, this can be a bigger problem because they haven't used English as a second language to really get a full sense. But start and begin are pretty interchangeable. But are they totally interchangeable? If your students want to know, can I say start and begin when I'm talking about, some action that I'm going to do? Absolutely. So the most common use of those words, they are synonymous. Buy and purchase. What can we learn here? And this is what's so cool about lexical semantics is that when you start to think, okay, are these synonyms or not? You have to think about things like when are they used? How often are they used? How formal is the situation? So I think we'd agree the essential meaning of buying and purchasing something is the same, but purchasing sounds a little more formal. Like, excuse me, I'm going to go purchase a soda? Probably not. Have you purchased the water I asked you to, right? So it's more common as a noun, right? Like an expensive purchase. Even there, it's not so high frequency, right? But they're very, very similar. Of course, they're synonyms, but there's a continuum. In every category here, we're talking about a continuum. Hard and difficult. Wonderful, amazing. By the way, I didn't say, but I got a couple examples of verb synonyms, adjective synonyms, and noun synonym there. But to really understand how related they are in this continuum, we need collocations. So if you start playing around with start and begin, and this is really the test. Start, begin, working, even start, begin, to work. They both can be followed by gerund or infinitive complement. So that's how similar they are. The same way, right? Like and hate, which are antonyms, can be with the gerund or the infinitive too. I hate doing it. I like doing it. I hate to do it. I like to do it. If you're thinking there's a difference in meaning, forget that. Not for people learning English, a second language. And in our first language, when we learn English, we don't distinguish in meaning either. So different. So this could be start to work, begin to work, start a project, begin a project. You plug stuff in, you're going to see start and begin really interchangeable. And in terms of formality, not a difference. But buy and purchase, those sound good with a new home. But as I said, purchase soda sounds a little strange. Hard and difficult when they mean that, it was not an easy day. And here an antonym can be useful. Hard meaning not easy, difficult meaning not easy. Easy does not have such a strong synonym as we have here with hard and difficult, unless I'm forgetting something. Wonderful, amazing. I mean, think about like amazement and wonder, right? Which I could have put here as noun synonyms. I mean, pretty similar. How you would say it though, like if somebody said, "Oh yeah, I had a wonderful time," an amazing time. So maybe amazing, especially when it's said with more emphasis, more intonation, is going to make it distinguishable from wonderful. But when we look at what the idea of a synonym is, it doesn't mean they have the exact same meaning. It doesn't mean they're totally interchangeable. It depends on context, certainly, and how formal it is. As we said, the situation, is it more written or more spoken? This is not easy for someone learning English as a second language, obviously. It's really so much about the context. But sometimes it's not so hard. And you should know when you can say more definitively, like a major achievement, a major accomplishment, pretty hard to say that there's any difference there, at least for me. But there you go, for me. So maybe somebody else, and that's just somebody else in North American English. We're not even thinking about other varieties of English around the world. So, but look at this. Start your car. That's a very high frequency collocation. Begin your car doesn't exist. So then is it idiomatic? Start your car, start your engine? No, it makes, I mean, it is idiomatic in the sense it's what we say, but is there something unusual? Begin just is not the collocation. But when you look at other examples, it works. So here we go, collocation and context. I mentioned purchase a soda, and not wrong, but sounds a little strange. But a hard surface, a difficult surface. We're back to the start your car. We don't begin your car and we don't begin your surface. So that means that in these cases, it's not synonymous, all right? There's another meaning. And then we're looking for synonyms of start your car, you know, I mean, ignite the engine, start the engine. Oh, start a fire, begin a fire. So we're into, there's another category of synonyms. So actually, start has more than one meaning, which means it's polysemous, which we get a spoiler alert coming up here. But a hard surface. We are not talking about the fact that it's difficult. However, is there some relationship between a hard exam and a hard surface, like tough, this kind of thing? So there's etymology. You can go back and see where words, you know, move around and their meanings can change. Is that good for your learners to know about? Well, if they're young learners, no, you're just going to be getting them to understand how to communicate. If you're talking about adults with a higher level, they might be more curious about these nuances. I would say if it keeps them motivated to build vocabulary, talk about it. If not, what's going to help them build their vocabulary is not so different from what's going to help a young learner build their vocabularies, right? Which is getting a very good example in a collocation, getting repeated exposure to it, trying to use it themselves, but especially seeing it enough times, hearing it enough times so that they can remember it. So, as a native speaker, I heard start your car, start your engine so many times that it made a collocation, that's it. But to somebody learning English, if they're translating, then it's not going to be the same. Why is it important to focus on synonymy? I pulled out some things. There's so many advantages of looking at lexical semantics, and some of them maybe you sort of take for granted or you don't even think about. Most of them we can talk about with all three of these areas. So, for example, recognition of synonyms enhances reading comprehension, but recognition of homophones and polysemous words as well. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these. But what's so important here is the context. Right? So we're saying context is how you learn about them in the first place to understand them, but it's also the benefit of putting in that work is that then when you're reading, not just reading, listening, right? getting input, you have better chance of understanding the meanings of the words, because basically you're building up your vocabulary. And for standardized tests, I know I have a comment later about polysemy and standardized tests, but even more commonly, they're asking for synonyms, right? Similar words, right? You need to find, and then learning how to summarize using similar words. Synonyms is so huge. I often say similar words and synonyms, right? Maybe you do as well. And then also, you can take a direct quote from something, but if you need to paraphrase what has been said, similar words are so important there, both on standardized tests and in everyday life. And let's not forget how it affects culture, right? So like we said before, when is it more formal or informal to say buy or purchase? When students have raised awareness of synonymy, I just love saying that word, of synonyms, then this can help. But of course, this is true. These are comments about lexical semantics generally. So keep these comments in mind as we continue. There are many synonym activities you can do with young children. It's about matching, right? Get a group of words and try to, with synonyms, try to match them. Games, relay race. This is a particularly good site. I chose teachingexpertise.com for this. I would recommend this, but a Google search, depending on if you're looking for stuff with adults, not as many things out there. When I was looking, I was thinking, God, I really need to put together some activities more for adults. I have a couple I'll tell you about coming up in this presentation, but we don't have enough time to get really into it. But luckily, if you teach young learners, there are a lot of really great synonym activities. For adults, I would say, don't really need an activity so much as just, as you're going along. This is true for, we talk about polysemy and homonymy too, that they know the concepts, you know them first. So with synonyms, I think that's pretty clear. Gets a little trickier with the others, but that when you know and can communicate, especially about that continuum, then they get used to asking, can I just say this in this situation or that in that situation? So with adults, you can have more conversations like that about similar words. Moving on to polysemy. Sounds like police every time I say it. Polysemy, police. We didn't talk about how, synonym, right? Like the similar as the root there. Here, poly meaning many and semi being meaning, right? Like semantics. So words with more than one meaning. That's how you remember what polysemy is. I have never in my life used this word with young learners. All right, when you talk about similar words, when we talk about polysemy, I don't even really talk about the fact that words have more than one meaning as much as with examples. But with older students and higher level students, I think it's really, really important to talk about polysemy. So give an example of a verb like take. And we didn't, this is why I was waiting for this moment to talk about definitions. Is a definition of take or put or get going to help anybody? As native speakers of languages, do we learn the meaning of words like that? We call them delexicalized verbs. So run is not as delexicalized as a verb like take, but it's in that area. Let me explain what I mean. Take my hand, take a picture, take a shower, take it easy. I learned the meaning of take through collocations. Those are chunks, back to the chunks. I didn't think, take has all these different meanings or struggle to remember the meanings. They come through in the collocations. So run. What's the first meaning we think of? It's really important to think of it. It's the most common meaning, maybe usually is the root meaning, and the other meanings flow from that, but not always. So we think of movement, right? Run. What about bright? think probably you're thinking about, light, and dish, the object, right? So you run a marathon, there's a collocation, run a race, but you can also run a company. Oh, what's a similar word for run? This is how polysemy and synonymy connect in a really cool way. Oh, manage or direct. I see. So polysemy is, right, when you look in the dictionary and you see there are multiple meanings for the same entry. You look up run and it's whoa, get, whoa, but that's going to overwhelm students. So a collocation or two, right? A couple of chunks to be able to remember, oh, run a company. A picture to help for younger learners, right? Bright light and a bright student. These words obviously connect. They are not synonyms in the same sense. This is the same word. It's two meanings, but they are related. Right? They are not unrelated. We're getting to that category next, right? It is not a linguistic accident. It's the opposite, right? They go together, and if you go back, you can figure out where. Now, sometimes it's immediately obvious, and sometimes it's not. So I think these examples is pretty obvious. So when you're going to start talking about polysemy, you start here. Right? Well, you're running a marathon, like managing a company, you're kind of running it. And it's not exactly the same meaning, of course. Bright light, idea, we have the light bulb, right? You wash the physical dish, but you cook a dish, right? Meaning the food, right? So different meanings, but there is a relationship. Yeah, standardized tests. I'll tell you, TOEFL is a great example here. So, TOEIC has more of a similar word focus. TOEFL, they love testing, TOEIC too, actually, but TOEFL more. They love testing vocabulary words to see if you can tell from the context which meaning it is, right? So a classic one would be like bank of a river, and bank meaning the financial institution, right? Now, maybe that would be pretty easy on TOEFL to know which one it is. But there are other examples, right, where they're asking you, and you can get tricked by going to one meaning. So really can help. Synonyms also, and polysemy works for standardized tests. And again, the context. You can really improve reading skills. Students can when they have more knowledge of these words, because there are so many of them out there, right? But let's look at a concrete example of what you can do. So I would start, I mentioned bank. Okay, that's kind of a classic example, but it's these delexicalized words that I think are verbs that are probably most important, right? So get, take, put, etc. The most common verbs in English, right? So the most common verbs in English are be, have, do, say, go, get, make, know, think, come. Those are mainly delexicalized verbs, right? So get is right up there, number 5 or 6 or something. So you can ask students, again, I'm thinking here, I tend to choose something to focus on that's not young kids, low learners, and there's not adults, high learners. Of course, you can have low adults and high young learners, but I think you know what I mean. What's the meaning of get in these sentences? It could be a similar word or just explaining it. We got home late. They got my email. She got a coffee. He got sick. So, got home, arrived, but is it always arrived? How do you get to this, right? How are you going to get there? I'm going to arrive, but just movement, right? So maybe a better way to help learners with this is, it's about movement. It's about movement. And can you think of other examples of get with movement, right? Get going, get this out of here, get away, right? There are many examples. But they got my email. Now, I hesitated here. Sometimes I talk about 3 different meanings with get or 4. Received, obtained is sort of similar. So like if I want to make it really simple, I'd put them together. But they got my email, they didn't do anything. They received it, right? right? So, but they did obtain it, right? But she got a coffee. She didn't really receive the coffee. So some students might not like that if I said it's received. So maybe, this is pretty close, obtain and receive in this way. But notice he got sick, to get old. It really means like to become or, grow. Right? To grow old, to get old, that idea of becoming. Are you obtaining something there? Or you see like, where all of this probably, not probably, definitely came from, and you can go back and look. I tend not to do that, not because I'm not interested, but I'm so much more interested in ways I can get students to easily understand and with collocations and remember and use than to go back and look at, where the etymology is, although I think it's really interesting stuff. What if you have higher level students and older students? You could do something like this. And they're great examples. If you look at collocations with words, you can find different examples that you could, use. To serve time, to serve food. If a bicycle serves you, serve the community, serve in the medical corps. Now, nobody would say that this is the same meaning in each sentence, but could we find some sort of similarity here that would help students so when they read, they can quickly get it? Well, let's see. So to serve time, you spend time. But let's keep going and see if we can see something that connects them a little bit more. So what I'm saying here is that sometimes, even though they're used differently, they don't have the same meaning. You can get a sense of how they're connected. So unlike get, this one I think is a little closer. The free food is served for the homeless people. So it sounds like, physical serving. So that's not the same as serving time. The old bike has served me well. It's useful for me. Another one would provide. It will serve the community well. Is that the same thing as serving the homeless people? No, because serve the homeless people is physical. Providing something physically and serve the community well is more abstract. And my mom serves in the medical corps, works as someone. I think you can kind of go into the provide area, can't you? You provide the time that you're supposed to provide. The bike is providing for you, like it's serving you, right? And you serve in the medical corps, again, like providing yours, a little bit like serving time, right? But still, I think it's back to collocations. Serve time. That's prison, basically. I don't serve your time at a company. I think that's more, you serve service, but not necessarily serve time is very common, or more common in prison. But maybe not. Anyway, I'll stop thinking about it. Tell me what you think. But serving food, that is, the physical one, right? That's the most obvious one. Like, the least kind of idiomatic idea of service, right? If we're looking back at where the original meaning of it comes from. So exercises like this, but with adults, you don't have to have exercises always as much as you're doing reading comprehension, you're doing listening comprehension, you're learning about writing as you go. What's a good way to remember this? I think it's almost always with a collocation, but is it also, can we look for the similar words? Can we say, oh, this word has many meanings? There are polysemes. Moving to our third one. Now, do you remember earlier, I said, not that much earlier, when we were talking about polysemy, that there's no lexical accident, right? These words, right? There's a connection somewhere. So even back to the classic bank where you have money and the river bank, there is a connection. right? You gotta go a little further back to find it. But when we're talking about homonyms, this is the linguistic action. Right? This is because I mean, keep saying it that way, right? Words come in from Greek and Latin, for example. So you can have a word that, like, wow, why would a language have a word that is spelled the same way but means something different, or it's pronounced the same way but it means something? That's not very economical. That's not very practical. Well, that's because of words coming in most of the time, right? That's what it's about. Although there are other ways that homonymy takes place. Homonymy is another word like synonymy and polysemy, all these words that we don't say, but we do talk about homonyms. But what happens when we talk about homonyms? I know there's some teachers watching this right now. Are like, I get so confused. What is a homonym? What is different about it? And then you have homophones and homographs. Okay, so let's take care of this once and for all. I hope. A homonym, I think this is the easiest way to look at it. And it's not, it's definitely a correct way to look at it. Whether somebody else would say, hey, it's better this way or easier to understand this way, fine. But what I'm going to say is absolutely true. Think of homonym as the category, right? Right? What does homo mean? Same, right? And same name here. Okay. So it's the whole idea of the words that are the same in some way. Well, homophones, how are they the same? They sound the same, and that's nice and easy with phone. So you know it's words that sound the same, but they don't have the same meaning. They may or may not have the same spelling. I don't get hung up on the or here. I will show you in a moment. But homographs is really different because they don't sound the same. They just look the same. They have the same spelling. They're written the same way. Graph is writing. Phone is sound. There you go. Now, if you're like, well, I never heard of homographs. I just heard of homonyms. Then you're probably, when you think of a homonym, you're thinking of a homophone. And this is where it can get confusing. So a homonym, right, can be either a homophone is a homonym and a homograph is a homonym. My advice, especially if you're teaching students this, so you're not talking about the youngest, but teaching synonyms, teach homonyms. There are two types. You've got your homophone and your homograph, and right away you look at examples. Homophones. Why are we saying or spellings? Well, let's start with the easy ones. Don't start with the ones with the same spelling, right? Because most of them have different spellings. So waste, whole. I probably shouldn't have done it this way, but I had another idea earlier. But you see the one at the top and the one at the bottom are sort of classic homophones when we think, okay, they are spelled differently, but they sound exactly the same. What you can do here with pronunciation is amazing. Right? This is where you really see, instead of just talking about phonetics and, the AI sound is the same as the A sound with the E at the end. So long A, here's a great example. Waste and waste. If you have a student that's like, to me, it's, waist and waste or something. You know what I mean? Like, this is a great example of how you can make it more interesting, especially when you put collocations in it, which we will in a moment, where you don't have to teach, phonetics separately, right? This is back to what I was saying at the beginning, right? You go along whether you're thinking about it, sort of collocations first, which is what I do, and then, okay, where are the homonyms, where are the synonyms, where are the multiple meaning words, the polysemous words, or you're doing it the opposite way. You're thinking about, okay, we're going to focus on synonyms, homonyms, and we're going to use collocations as an example. Either way, right? Pronunciation, spelling, these things are all happening at the same time. So for spelling and pronunciation, the sound-spelling relationship in English, homophones and homographs are so cool. So then we also have, as you see here, two, and two. Now, if you're thinking, but what are there really two twos, T-O? Yes, there are. Think about what they are for a moment. because that's a really important one. I'm sneaking in something about grammar that is so important for students to understand. And then right. Well, clearly we have right and right, meaning like whatever you're thinking right means, and to write. But look at right and right. Polysemy, different entries in the dictionary, right? Right meaning correct, and right meaning a right turn. As far as I know, that's a linguistic accident in some way, right? So we would not consider that polysemy. You're going to see different definitions of right and right in the dictionary, despite the fact that they're spelled the same. But the reason we usually think of homophones as being spelled differently is because there are more examples of that, way more examples of that. We need the collocations. So I'm separating it just for you as teachers to make sure it's clear. But I don't believe in ever separating the chunks, right? So around your waist, what a waste. Why see waist and waist together without the collocations? And what about definitions again? Do you really need a definition of waist and waist here? I mean, the word in the first language, whatever their first language is, could be really important as a quick way to get it. But after that, it's the collocation. It's not the definition, right? A waste of time. Waste meaning like garbage, right? Very distinguishable from the part of your body, right? The 4 twos, not the 2 twos. Go to the store, want to leave. Talk about a linguistic accident. Talk about a really messed up thing about English. The fact that to, to, is a preposition and to is infinitive, part of the verb form. Totally different things, right? Totally different functions. And that gets really confusing, especially when teachers make a mistake with that one, which I see all the time. So learn that one so that you don't make the mistake, not just in identifying to as a preposition or part of the infinitive, but so that you're not making mistakes that make it harder for them to develop correct build their vocabularies and things like that. Yeah. So you want to definitely point this out, intermediate and above with adults. The difference between TO there. It's really, really important. And I think these words are so common that nobody would think it's strange they sound the same. It's kind of like, oh, I never thought about that. They sound exactly the same. Nobody's going to say twoo here or pronounce TOO with a longer oo, which is different in some cases. Like whole and day, they might think should be different. They wouldn't think they would sound the same. So it can be really, really enlightening for students to look at homophones and then homographs, which we're going to talk to. So yeah, you're right, meaning you're correct. And it's again, like we were doing in polysemy, back to synonyms. What's a good synonym for right? Correct. Turn right, I'm not sure they're that way, right? Or what, starboard on a boat is right, but you know what I mean? Like some words have similar words, some don't. So if they're making vocabulary notebooks, right, you could have similar words, like a synonym section. You could have, are there any homophones, right? Lots of stuff you can do with lexical semantics in a vocabulary notebook. Dig a hole and the whole day. Now, on to homographs. I love talking about homographs for pronunciation. I mean, both of them, homophones, homographs, such a cool way to get into pronunciation, to see the different possible sounds. So English is full of this, right? Where the sound spelling relationship is all over the place. Is there a connection between them or not? Homographs, interesting. So I said before, there's no connection. It's a linguistic accident. I would say that generally because it's the easiest way. And if there is a connection, it goes super far back. For example, bow and bow. The idea of a bow and bow. Is there some connection? I mean, it's fun to think about Definitely not something to tell students, because I think that's just going to confuse them more, right? Certainly close and close, right? The difference in the pronunciation really shows you that there's a big difference with these words. Tier, which most students know and they think when they see this, and tear, but the EA sound. Oh, what other words rhyme with tier and rhyme with tear? Because when we get to the rhyming, this can really help, right? And with homophones, I didn't mention that, but same type of thing, right? Oh, tear, fear. Oh, I see the sound spelling relationship, but then tear, wear, bear. Okay, so you're practicing pronunciation and vocabulary at the same time. I love this last one. I had to put it in. This is one of my favorites. And this can be also like, oh, why English is so hard to learn, why it's so crazy. You find these memes and these sites. And I like it to have fun with the language. But remember, as teachers, it's not fun. When you're learning. Now, if you're a non-native teacher, this is what's so great about non-native teachers, better than many native teachers, is that they know that it's not fun. So they're looking for strategies of how to remember this stuff, not like, hey, let's look at how messed up English is. But you'll know what I mean when we look at this example. So wind, meaning like to wind your watch in the old days. I have a collocation coming up. And wind, but the past tense of wind is wound, but then we have another homograph with wound, which is wound. Before I make you crazy, let's get the collocation. And this is why, just for purposes of this webinar, I put them here for you to think about them before we look. But when you have the chunk, when you have the collocation, you're on firmer ground. And that's where you want your students to be. So if they're a higher level and they understand bow, oh, what are some collocations with bow? Tie a bow, okay, or a bow tie, or I had another example, but I can't think of it. Anyway, I'm a big believer in one collocation that is easy to remember, high frequency. So tie a ribbon. Oh, back to the similar words, like a ribbon, but a bow is really a specific look. But yes. You could take a ribbon and tie a bow with your ribbon. Take a bow. Okay, to bow down, right? Oh, I didn't put blue on my close and my close. Sorry about that. Those should be in blue just so it's easier to see. Close to home, close the door. You've also got minimal pairs here. So I didn't mention this. I'm glad I remembered it when we're talking about pronunciation just a moment ago. So minimal pairs, such a great way to notice the difference in sounds and spelling. So close, close, everything's the same except the s and the z sound. So if your students have a language like French, where I teach mainly in French students, where the z and the s, it can be a little confusing, different from English, without getting into detail. That could be useful to have minimal pairs with S and Z, and then you're also helping them with vocabulary that way. Tear in my eye, tear up the paper, wind the cable, a strong wind. I wound, again, no blue, sorry guys. I wound up staying. I wound the cable. Wound up is the phrasal verb that's more idiomatic here, but a serious wound, like a deep wound from an injury. So that's homonymy. So I'll let you read this while I just talk about it for a moment. Again, these are observations that really apply to really anything in lexical semantics we're talking about. So I tried to switch it up a little bit here. But words with when students recognize that there are these different forms, it's going to make it much easier for them to understand what they read and what they hear. But that's really a generalized statement here, which could be about any of these things. But this one is really important. This is the pronunciation part. It doesn't have the word pronunciation in it. But compared to the other areas we talked about today, talking about homonyms, homophones, and homographs, it's really a great way to help students with their pronunciation. Of course, that helps with their communication skills. In terms of activities with homophones, again, for kids, tons of stuff out there, not as much for adults, but if you're teaching kids and you're looking for fun ways to practice with homophones, this is a good site. Emily.com or Emile or Emile, depending, I guess. But this something I saw looked really good. I created something for adults. It doesn't have to be for adults. This could be for sort of higher level kids, but this is a card game. I make a lot of card games like this. So it's matching. I mean, it could just be like, okay, you need to match them. But what you can do is you can play different games, where you're trying like concentration or go fish or different games where you're actually playing cards. But these are also, you can take this to get some ideas of collocations that you could use, use just for examples, right? So, it shouldn't be too hard for them to match them. Because it's harder than you think for some students. I think you just have to look for the other one. So just having them match them up at the beginning, but once they have them, they can also play games where they're making sentences with them. Like once they really understand them, they could use them to make sentences to build their vocabularies that way. And you can always check the pronunciation while they're playing with these games is what I'd suggest, right? Like they know they sound the same because you've told them they do, but that doesn't mean that they're pronouncing them correctly. So whether they're playing a game or they're using them in sentences or in stories. And of course, you can do this kind of thing with synonyms as well and polysemous words. So collocations, matching, getting practice, most important thing. My friends, I will leave you with this, as I always do, because I think this is what it's all about. Practice builds accuracy, meaning when you get repeated exposure, in this case, we're talking about lexical semantics. When you get increased practice, meaningful repetition, you're going to be more accurate in your use of the language and your understanding and your use, and you will feel more confident. Then you'll be ready to use the language with fluency. So focusing too much on fluency early, like, hey, you have these collocations, use them, right? Have they really seen them enough? Have they heard them enough? Have they practiced them enough? They might know, okay, these two words are synonyms. They understand the meaning. They know these two words have multiple meanings, but have they had enough practice so that it's become more automatic? So that's sort of built into that accuracy idea. And then the confidence they'll have, they'll be able to take that and use English more fluently. And as always, make sure what you do is pleasurable, so they'll remember it, because what we learn with pleasure, we never forget. My friends, that brings us to the end of another American TESOL Institute webinar. Thank you so much for joining live. Thank you so much. If you are watching the recording, please share the recording out, whether it's from YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are, to friends and colleagues that you think might benefit from it. And join us next month when we should be here with a featured teacher coming up next month in October. So signing off from Paris, France, Jason Levine here, Fluency MC. Thanks so much to all of you. Thanks so much, American TESOL Institute, English teachers around the world. Peace, respect. Bye-bye.